Hello and welcome to today's event, 5 Best Practices for Achieving Zero Trust. I'm Deb Snyder, Senior Fellow for the Center for Digital Government, and I'm excited to serve as your moderator for today's event. I just want to say thank you for joining us. I know we're in for an informative session over the next 30 minutes. But before we begin, a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of the presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 48 hours. You can use the recording for your reference, or you can feel free to pass it along to your colleagues. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A with us by asking questions at any time during the presentation. You should see a Q&A box at the bottom left of the presentation panel. Please send in your questions as they come up, and we'll address as many as we can during the webinar today. Also, during today's webinar, you'll be able to connect with your peers via the LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook platforms. Please use hashtag GovTechLive to connect with your peers across the government technology platform via Twitter. At the close of the webinar, we encourage you to complete a brief survey about the presentation. We'd really like to hear what you think. So if you're unable to stay with us for the entire webinar, but you'd like to complete the survey as much as you're able, please just click on the survey widget at the bottom of the screen to launch the survey. Otherwise, it just pops right up for you once the webinar concludes. All right, at this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers, and if you're experiencing any media players whatsoever or you have any other problems, please visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help button at the bottom of the console. Okay, let's get started. Joining me today to discuss this very timely topic is Tony D'Angelo, Vice President, Public Sector at Lookout. Welcome, Tony. Just want to tell our folks a little bit about you. Tony leads the Americas public sector team at Lookout, and he brings more than 30 years of experience in the IT industry. Prior to joining Lookout, he held various sales leadership roles at Proofpoint, Polycom, Brocade, and Nortel. Originally from New York, he received his Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University at Buffalo, and he spent his entire professional career in Washington, D.C. Having joined Lookout in 2019 to lead the Americas Commercial Enterprise team, he now leads up the combined federal SLED, State and Local Education Business Unit. All right, since we've got you here, Tony, anything you want to say in addition to what I've already introduced for you?
That was a good intro. It's just good to be here with you today, Deb. Thank you.
Great. It's super glad to have you. So before we get started, we have just a couple polling questions for you. And the first polling question is, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. We don't have polling questions for you today because this is a 30-minute webinar, and so we're on a tight schedule. So Tony, we're going to go right to the panel discussion. So as a brief lead into the panel, I'd just like to ask you to take a few minutes to highlight your thoughts as to the high-level issues at hand, any pain points and challenges that you see in working with clients.
I think there's so much that's changing. I think this notion of the perimeter is gone was something that was already in flight. We have kind of seen this occurring over the past couple of years where users have been working from home more. We're seeing less and less people, certainly because of the pandemic, which has accelerated everything. It's made it more challenging and has kind of created a lot of confusion. There's this, which is probably the most popular and already beginning to be one of the most overused terms, which is zero trust. It's causing a lot of confusion as well. It's, where are we and where do we go from here? So I think it really, top to bottom, all elements around cybersecurity are becoming confusing. So a lot of new technologies out there. How do they all fit together? Is there overlap? Is there underlap? And every day, I mean, the threat increases. Ransomware is probably here to stay. There's different threat vectors, different attack surfaces. Some old things become new again, and it's a combination of state-sponsored as well as individual-based attacks. So it's everything from intellectual property to ransomware. So the threat of financial loss. So a lot of challenges. I mean, I think it's quite stressful, and then all of us being at home makes it a little more difficult to collaborate and try to put all these things together. So my heart goes out to everybody that are in those roles and are that already perhaps had plans in place that are now trying to accelerate those based on the pandemic and the additional confusion and challenges that it's caused.
I would definitely agree, and it certainly makes it hard to focus when you're bouncing from topic to topic to topic or challenge to challenge. So you mentioned zero trust. There's a tremendous amount of interest in and talk about zero trust. In fact, some call it the latest buzzword, but it's been around for over a decade. So let's talk about that a little bit, because the recent requirements in the May 2020 executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity do call forth and call out zero trust adoption. So I suspect it might mean different things to different people and different organizations. Just to level set, let's start by defining what it is and isn't, in your opinion. What are the core principles and components?
Yeah, I think at the most basic level, you should understand that there should be no implicit trust either inside or outside the network. And then I think that breaks down to a couple of other points. Users need to be authorized and authenticated, and we have to ensure that every user and device are accessing data from secure, healthy systems. And then finally, we're constantly verifying the device and the user behavior for data that's in transit and at rest. So, which is kind of this notion of continuous conditional access. So when you put all those things together, it's quite a different take from thinking about the days of old when all knowledge workers might be in the same brick and mortar facility together with a data center in the basement, and we had border routers and firewalls to protect us from the bad threat actors outside the organization. But even in those days, there was still the insider threat as well, right? So we had the border and the firewalls. But the insider threat, which was perhaps intentional or accidental in terms of data leakage, was always a problem. So now we look at it a little bit differently. Again, it's it's user, it's device, it's the network, it's all of the data, and the behavior analytics of what's happening to that data. So for example, Deb, if 3 o'clock in the morning, it appeared that you were downloading a significant amount of data from a foreign country that might not be a friendly country, that should spark alarm, and system bells should be going off. And those are just some of the things that we're thinking about more now than ever before.
So considering that zero trust is not a new concept, what are some of the strategies that organizations need to get their head around in creating the foundation? How does it change your thinking about security?
Yeah, we talked about the perimeter being gone. The pandemic has accelerated things, and one of the problems is, and this was already occurring. This is partly why the perimeter had broken down, which is this remote workforce, which had been growing, and then went to almost 100% over the last couple of years with some types of agencies and organizations that could allow it. To take an unknown mobile device, whether it was personally owned or government furnished, and there was this high demand almost overnight to access data and systems with those devices. And again, they were unknown devices, potentially from unknown users, so created a lot of complexity. It shined a light on one of the things that Lookout has done for over a decade now, which is mobile threat defense on mobile devices, tablets, phones, that sort of thing. And that absolutely should be and is part of a zero trust architecture, really considering those mobile devices. Today, roughly 70% of all internet traffic is accessed by a mobile device, but depending on whether you're looking at the public sector or private sector, somewhere between in the neighborhood of 25 to 35% of all devices have some sort of mobile threat defense protection. Not to be confused with MDM, which can manage a device, but really, blocking threats, phishing attacks, bad apps, weak iOS, those types of things. And so the formula is a little bit upside down right now. And again, I think the pandemic has shined a light on some of those gaps, and we're seeing a lot more mobile requirements being part of zero trust architecture for these agencies.
Since mobile devices are making up, as you say, the large percentage of devices that are accessing one's network, applications, data, and so on, it makes perfect sense to up the game in terms of mobile threat detection at that particular population of endpoints. So let's talk about the last past 18 months or so. State and local government organizations have experienced an incredible, overwhelming, and unprecedented level of change as the pandemic accelerated migration of data, applications, workload to the cloud, increasing the demand for citizen-facing services, and creating this mass need for flexibility in remote hybrid work capabilities. And of course, all these changes have created alongside people, process, and technology changes. So what strategies and lessons might we take from the experience looking over our shoulder and apply going forward? How can a zero trust approach help us here?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, don't stress on how to get started. I think that's number one. It's easier said than done. I'm just the guy talking about it today, and our listeners are the ones who really have to implement it. But I can back that up, and the way I'll back that up is to say that so much good work has already been done. You mentioned earlier that the White House released an executive order on cybersecurity, and then from that, we've seen NIST create a zero trust framework. CISA organization, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency under DHS, has come up with their own 5 pillars. DISA for DoD has an architecture that's 7 pillars, but ultimately they all have for the most part the same fundamentals, whether it's 5 pillars or 7 pillars. And I think the 5 that we really need to be focused on are continuous assessment of device risk, ensure we have visibility into user behavior, securing application workloads, understanding and securing the data at risk and at transit. We've talked about a couple of these things already, and securing network configurations. And if you look at these frameworks, and some of them are well over 100 pages, it's a good blueprint to get started. And each of the agencies, whether you're large or small, whether you're state or local, you're going to have different needs and different requirements, but it'll at least provide a baseline, so you don't have to go create a lot of this work from scratch. You can take some of the good work that's already been done, and I think that's kind of how I started this by saying don't stress. There's a lot of activity and energy that's been put into this that I think will be well utilized at the state and local level that's already been created at the federal level.
So pick a framework that works for you, that fits your organization, and then get started, right? Figure out where you are, assess where you are in that journey, and leverage a partner. So you mentioned an SLG Zero Trust Best Practices Guide. Is that available through our widget, through our webinar widget, or can we make that available to our audience after the fact?
We absolutely can. Yep, sure can.
Okay. All right. So that might be something to send out with the link then to the webinar to everybody that's listening. Great. So
Indeed.
How does cloud play into zero trust architecture? How does it influence being able to pursue zero trust strategies, particularly when you're dealing with a hybrid infrastructure, a multi-cloud environment?
Yeah, that's a good question, and really that's kind of the root of the building blocks of zero trust, because as I mentioned, with the perimeter being gone and most of the data centers no longer being on-prem or within the same brick and mortar facilities as the knowledge workers, it creates some challenges, right? There is, you think about commercial cloud applications, perhaps like Office 365. Well, there's a cloud-based security technology to support that, which should be part of everybody's zero trust architecture, and that technology is CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker. CASB is one. ZTNA, it often gets confused with zero trust as an architecture, but the terminology is zero trust network architecture, or excuse me, zero trust network access. This is a secondary kind of cloud security solution, which is more designed for legacy systems or some of those applications that continue to reside on-prem. So again, you have CASB for commercial cloud applications, ZTNA for on-prem legacy applications, and it's also often used for VPN replacement, so replacing hardware technologies. And the third is secure web gateway, which that's effectively for any of us that are browsing the web during the day, whether it's for personal use or business use, want to provide a level of security for that user. It's also important to note that all three of these technologies effectively come with kind of what I like to say a DLP wrapper, data loss prevention. So it starts to look at, again, some of those behavior analytics, and are we intentionally or accidentally sending out PII or account information or other proprietary information that we don't want leaked out outside the network. As well, I would highly recommend that whatever vendor you choose, even though Lookout does provide all of those technologies, whatever vendor you choose, those three technologies ideally should come from a single vendor. It's going to provide the best user access because you think about during the course of a day, Deb, whether it's you or me or any of our listeners, we're surfing the web, we're using a commercial cloud application, and we're using perhaps a legacy application that still resides on-prem. Running all that through a single proxy is going to provide the best user experience, and it's also going to provide your IT administrator with a single policy engine and single pane of glass to manage all those technologies. So I think best of breed is always a great concept, and I think there are plenty of other areas within the security stack that we can do those things. But with these three technologies, I would probably recommend picking a single vendor or picking a vendor that at least has a roadmap of delivering all of those products at some point. The last thing I'll say is I know probably many of our listeners, certainly at the state and local, and because I know the federal level does as well, they pay a lot of attention to the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So Gartner has, over the years, done individual quadrants for some of these technologies, whether it's ZTNA or CASB. The one that's going to be released early in 2022 is going to be a single Magic Quadrant, and it will only incorporate vendors that have all three of these technologies, further reinforcing the point that I made about having single vendor provide all three. So if you don't have all three of those technologies, you will not be able to participate or not be reviewed within that Magic Quadrant, and the other single quadrants, for individual technologies are going to be going away. So I think that's an important element to look at, who's doing what and, trying to pick the best technology for your specific situations. The other thing I would say is the last point on that is Gartner is recoining a new term. So SASE is the umbrella technology for all three of those that I had mentioned, ZTNA, CASB, and SWIG. They're going to change so SASE is Secure Access Service Edge, and they're going to be dropping the A. So you will now be seeing SSE, but that's just going to be a new moniker for what was previously known as SASE. So I think I encourage everybody to look for that new Magic Quadrant coming out in the new year, and I think it'll be, along with some of these other architecture documents already created, could be a good blueprint for helping you pick the right technologies based on what your needs are.
Well, thanks for that look into the future so that our listeners can get out ahead of that. I would imagine the more centralized and integrated these three are in your platform or in your cloud hybrid infrastructure, the better in terms of, as you mentioned, policy management output, in terms of data centralization, all your security data, and user experience, as you mentioned. So again, thanks for mentioning that Gartner Magic Quadrant and the fact that they are looking at it as a centralized resource as well. That's really important to understand. So you mentioned mandates, and with mandates emphasizing the need for EDR, specifically M2201 in the federal sense, how are states developing strategies around threat intelligence and proactive endpoint detection and response strategies like threat hunting?
Yeah, great question, Deb. Again, we previously talked about the executive order on zero trust. There have been two recent mandates that have come out from OMB, the Office of Management and Budget at the federal level. One was around critical software. We've seen a lot of things in the press about vulnerabilities found in various software and the need to patch them. So that kind of addresses that one. But the second one, it's OMB M22-01 for those that are interested, and that is around EDR. So what it does, endpoint detection and response is not a new concept, but really at its basic level, it takes us from playing defense to take us to playing offense with cybersecurity. So waiting for a breach or waiting for somebody to kick in your back door and enter your home, we're getting to the point where we're identifying what we perceive the threats to be and stopping them before there's that actual break-in. So you can do that on mobile, you can do that on desktop. There's this technology known as XDR, which allows you to effectively dump the EDR data collection into a kind of a single data lake, if you will, and begin to look at all of that threat intel. So defense is great, but playing offense is a lot better. And I think this is a really exciting transition for cybersecurity, where people are thinking about being a lot more proactive and identifying the threats before they even get to us.
I really couldn't agree with you more. I mean, back when I was the CISO of the state of New York, I used to talk about, a girl can dream, right? Consolidating and contextualizing all of those different sources of threat intelligence and then running those against our assets in an automated sense that cut through all the white noise, got rid of all of that chafe, if you will, and identified the actionable events that one could actually hop on and proactively defend against. So getting out in front of that, seeing that come to fruition is really exciting for me personally. But most organizations aren't able to just shift gears and go all in on zero trust. The good news is you don't have to rip everything out and start over again. What would your advice be for organizations that have, say, a smaller footprint or a smaller security team? What should they be focusing in on first and foremost? And what do security leaders need to consider as they best prioritize their resources and efforts?
Yeah. I think, again, I would recommend utilizing the playbooks that are already written and try to assess where you are. You look at your budget, look at your available, not just financial resources, but human resources. What types of projects can we take on? What are our systems that are most at risk? And then begin to build a plan that's based on financial resources and human resources to put that plan into place. Whether it's CASB this year, ZTNA and SWIG next year, is it mobile threat defense now? Are 100% of our knowledge workers working from home? Maybe mobile threat defense becomes number one. So I think there's going to be, depending on what the agency's mission is and the type of data that is the most secure, it will partly determine what action should be taken. I would also consider if you have a limited human resource, limited staff, and limited ability to, whether it's either knowledge-based or just the amount of staff and other priorities that you have to take on, consider outsourcing. And there's all these solutions we're talking about are cloud-based software solutions. So it can be done and managed anywhere. So consider outsourcing to a managed service provider. Consider outsourcing perhaps to a large systems integrator that could provide, staff augmentation or even some of the, the intelligence around helping build and execute those plans. And the other thing I would say is there's a lot of available funds out there. So there's at the federal level, there's been $1 billion law that's been signed, $1 billion bill that's been signed into law. And that is, it'll be released once continuing resolution is over, and we're kind of predicting that's going to be in maybe the February, March timeframe, unfortunately. So there's a chance it could go all year because there's a lot of fighting going on Capitol Hill, as I think everybody's aware. But despite that fact, $1 billion is a lot of money, even spread across 50 states and probably territories as well. I think there's ample funds and other grant money that could probably be sought just based on the fact that it is cybersecurity and it's everybody's number one initiative.
I think you make a valid point, right? I'm very excited about the fact that we have $1 billion worth of funding that's going to come down to state and local level to improve cyber. So I think it's a great time, as you allude, to re-examine your strategic plans, figure out perhaps what you put in fast and furious under duress during COVID, what fits from a long-term strategy perspective, and to also get your use cases ready. So when those funds are announced, when those grants hit the ground, if you will, that you can drag those use cases off the shelf and your strategic plan all prioritized and give them to your grant writers and go and get some of that available funding. So thank you for mentioning that. I also think that there's some value in the CISA playbooks that were just put out. You mentioned using available frameworks, resources. CISA put out playbooks for incident response and vulnerability response that are quite good and quite on point with the executive order. So all of those things are out there. Use them and partner with good partners like yourself who can bring those things to bear. So since every organization is going to be a little bit different, How can you best help organizations get started? What do you do to help them build on what they have and leverage those new strategies?
Yeah, I think it's the planning and preparation, right? I mean, I think it's working with, your vendor partners. It's working with your outsourced partners, and it's also, I think, at a peer level, having been on the vendor side of things my entire career, I'm always amazed and pleased with how often I hear and witness, our top customers that, work with their peers in other states or other, federal agencies and things like that. So you find someone that it might have a similar mission to you, or maybe even similar size agency that's maybe a little bit ahead, and you try to get some lessons learned and some best practices. There's oftentimes there's workshops or user group meetings and things like that. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn from others and shorten some of those, shorten the cycle perhaps, and ensure you don't make mistakes along the way, or minimize the number of mistakes.
At least don't make the ones we know about, right?
Right. Make them once, just don't make them twice. Yeah.
So do you have a success story that you can share real quick with us? Maybe even one that shows the pitfalls to avoid?
Yeah, I have a couple I would think that come to mind. So, and I think it's interesting because as I look at our own business and how we want to help customers, we look at the public sector as a series of verticals and sub-verticals. And, there's the federal level, there's state, local, there's education, and then within there's K through 12, there's higher ed, there's university healthcare, there's defense, there's law enforcement, public safety, transportation. So there's so many different elements and sub-elements, and each of them have a different mission. So we've got a very broad product portfolio. So we look at these as in very micro-segmented use cases, because we don't, I'd be lying if I tell you we weren't in business to be a profitable company, but at the same time, we want to provide the best solutions to our customers that meet the challenges that they have. So we look at these, and one that comes to mind, there was a university that was doing medical research. So they had a strong need to secure their intellectual property. So they opted for one of our CASB solutions, and for commercial cloud applications. And they had a lot of data that they didn't want stolen or put out into the public domain until it had been vetted or whatever it was that they were going to do with that data, whether it was for pharma or other medical uses. And similar along the lines of healthcare, a university hospital, which was actually providing patient care, they also utilized a CASB solution, but it was for a very different reason. They were trying to secure all the patient data in the cloud. And you think about, you and me and all of our listeners and all of those health records, that's really important data that we don't want, stolen and out in the public domain. So these cloud security solutions, as people move to zero trust, can protect and again, as I mentioned earlier, data at rest and data in transit, and patient health records, often is both, and on mobile devices for many of the healthcare professionals walking around the room. So those are interesting use cases as well. The last one, there was a state agency that had a lot of workers in the field. Now the data on and they're using tablets, and the data on those devices wasn't particularly sensitive. But what they wanted to do was provide phishing and content protection for those users. So the phishing is typically for credential harvesting, so trying to get some of these username and password. Most of our mobile devices don't have a lot of sensitive data on them, but these phishing attacks that most of the time come through text or email are looking for our credentials. And then they also wanted to provide a level of content protection. They want to keep the browsers open so people could use them as if they were their own devices, but they're trying to minimize certain types of content that might be accessed, maybe adult content, maybe gambling sites, things like that. So they did want to put some constraints, but at the same time, have it at least be a more usable device and not completely lock down the browser. So those are the things that again, I think a lot of this just is use case. What is it you're trying to do, and what are you trying to protect? And there's a lot of different technology solutions out there that can meet those requirements.
What are you trying to solve for? What's the problem you're trying to solve for, right? That's always what we should be asking ourselves.
Yep,
So
exactly.
let's jump right into a couple questions from the audience.
Sure.
Many of you have been asking about getting copies of today's presentation and the resource that Tony mentioned. So within the next 48 hours, Government Technology will provide all attendees with a link to the recording for your reference and to share with your colleagues. Another question that's come in, current incidents that have made the news certainly reinforce the need for agencies to have a robust plan for ransomware. Tony, what are your thoughts on the evolving threat landscape and deflecting such attacks?
Well, ransomware is probably here to stay. I live in the state of Virginia, and within the last, within the last couple of weeks, we've heard about the Virginia legislature being shut down. State of Maryland had a health, one of the agencies around healthcare had some issues, and I by no means picking on those agencies because everybody's victim, everybody has issues. Washington and Baltimore have had issues, and that's just in my backyard. I mean, if I can look broadly, and it happens everywhere, and it's certainly no one's fault. But I think that is here to stay, and we have to really get our arms around that problem. And I think this notion that we're somehow protected and everything is good, and there's this kind of proclamation of mission accomplished, that's probably should never be the case. The threat vector, the threat attack surface will always continue to evolve, and we're always striving to get there. And this is kind of this notion of zero trust. So we're always striving to get there, but it's something we will never quite achieve and probably shouldn't, because it's going to keep changing. And I think over the next, decade or so, we might not call it zero trust anymore, but it's going to be the same kind of concept where all these things that we can do to minimize the new, whatever the new attack surface of the day is, and try to minimize those before they get in.
Yeah, I think your key point there is that it's going to evolve. Just as business has evolved and technology is transitioning faster than we can keep up with it, so too will the construct of zero trust and what that actually means in application and deployment. So can you take just a minute or two to sum up your final thoughts and key takeaways? What do you want to leave our audience with, and what do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, I think, it's just reinforcing points that I've already made. Utilize the frameworks that have already been developed. Don't panic. Try to assess where you are, and it's not whether you're a large agency or a small agency. It could be based on your mission. It could also be based on where you are in this journey of zero trust. Anyway, really take a look at where you think you have the most gaps. Try to fund those, prioritize those, consider outsourcing. And really just, wrap your head around all these different elements. Know that the attack surface, particularly ransomware, those things are not going away. And there are a lot of solutions out there, a lot of companies that can provide the support that you need. And also there's a lot of funding mechanisms that are becoming more prevalent, whether it's the federal level or even at the state level, to take advantage of. So, I wish everybody luck. I think there's a lot of support out there from the vendor community as well as inside the government.
There's a lot to do, right? So you had mentioned when we spoke before, you'd mentioned a resource, Predictions 2022, Work from Anywhere marks the beginning of the end of on-premises security. Can that link also be provided to our audience after the fact? Can we get that out
Absolutely.
to them in the email? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. I think
even to add on to that, and my previous comment, I think the notion of work from home will continue. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. The pandemic is unfortunately not going away anytime soon. So telework, permanent work from home is going to be pervasive in a lot of areas, and the need to secure mobile devices should be certainly part of any one of these zero trust plans.
Lots to think about, Tony. Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of our time commitments, so we're going to wrap it up here. But I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us for today's event. A big, huge thank you to you, Tony, for being here. And of course, a special thanks to our partner, Lookout, for enabling us to bring this wonderful and worthwhile discussion to the audience. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you soon at another government technology event. Stay safe and have a great holiday season.
Thanks for having me.